After my wife passed, I signed over my life savings, my commercial kitchen, and 2 years of my labor to help my daughter and her husband launch a food business. The night they cut the ribbon on their grand opening, my son-in-law handed me an apron and introduced me to the guests as the dishwasher. 3 days later, he changed the locks. I walked out with $487 and a recipe box that had belonged to my mother. 11 years later, he called me from a lawyer's office. He needed one document I still owned. And when I arrived, I saw who was standing in the hallway behind him. The night Derek Holt called me a liability. 40-some people were eating food I had taught his wife to cook. He said it with a smile, the kind that makes the person being insulted wonder if they misheard. "Frank's been in this kitchen since before most of you were born," he told the room, holding a glass of sparkling water like it was a trophy, "which is why we've decided to let him enjoy his retirement. A man his age shouldn't have to work so hard." He laughed. A few guests laughed with him. My daughter, Caroline, stood near the dessert table and looked at the floor. I remember every detail the way you remember the moment before a car accident. The copper pots I'd bought at a restaurant supply auction in Memphis. The hand-lettered chalkboard menu Caroline and I had designed on her kitchen table. The smell of the smoked brisket I had been perfecting since 1987. My 7-year-old granddaughter, Lily, sitting on a bar stool near the hostess stand, wearing a dress with yellow sunflowers, swinging her legs and watching the adults with the calm attention children give to things they don't yet have words for. I had bought the building on Caldwell Street in Knoxville, Tennessee, in 2009, when the neighborhood was mostly empty, storefronts and optimism nobody could afford to act on. My wife Dottie had insisted. She said the bones were good. I said we could barely cover the note on our house. She said some decisions weren't about money. She was usually right about those. We spent 11 years running a small catering operation out of the back. Just the two of us, and whoever the kids could recruit for weekend events. Nothing grand, but ours. When Dottie got sick, the catering work slowed because I couldn't be in two places at once. 2 years after she died, Caroline came to me with a proposal. She and Derek wanted to open a real restaurant. Full service, dinner 5 nights a week, Sunday brunch. The neighborhood had changed. Young professionals were moving in. The timing was right. "It would keep Mom's dream alive," she said. "I want you to understand that sentence, because it opened every door I should have thought harder about." The building was mine, free and clear. The bank wouldn't finance a restaurant build-out without a long-term right to the property. Our family attorney, a steady man named Paul Griffith, suggested a commercial lease. Holt Family Kitchen LLC would occupy the building for 10 years at $1 per year. At the end of the term, the company could request a purchase, but transfer of ownership required a separate signed agreement with an agreed-upon price. Paul underlined that clause twice when he read it to us at his office table. "Frank," he said, looking directly at me, "the lease protects the building. It does not protect your promised share of the restaurant. You need an operating agreement that puts your 30% ownership in writing before construction begins." Derek leaned forward. "Paul, we haven't even settled on an LLC structure yet. Let us get through the build-out, and we'll handle the ownership documents before opening week." Caroline squeezed my hand. "Your family, Dad. We would never leave you out." I signed the lease. I told myself the operating agreement could wait. The first year felt like something worth living for again. I rebuilt the kitchen from the studs out. I sourced the equipment, negotiated with suppliers, trained the first line cooks, and developed every item on the opening menu. Caroline handled the front of house with a natural warmth that made strangers feel like regulars. Derek handled the money and the marketing, and he was good at both. He photographed my hands rolling biscuit dough and posted the pictures online with captions about 3 generations of Southern cooking. He called me the soul of Holt Family Kitchen at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast. He called me difficult when I asked to see the books. My contribution by the time we opened was $58,000 in cash, and what I estimated as 2,400 hours of my labor. I kept a log in a yellow legal pad the way Dottie had taught me to keep records, every dollar and every day. The operating agreement never came. When I asked, Derek said his accountant was still reviewing it. Then he said a bank covenant restricted, adding minority members. Then he said my contribution would be formalized as founder equity after the first full fiscal year. Caroline repeated each of these explanations like she was reading from a card. 6 weeks before the grand opening, I found a copy of the incorporation documents in the printer tray in Derek's office. Holt Family Kitchen LLC was owned 70% by Derek and 30% by Caroline. My name appeared once in an exhibit attached to the lease, where my $58,000 was listed as a non-refundable family contribution. I brought the page to Caroline. She read it, set it on the counter, and said, "That's just a placeholder. A filed document is not a placeholder." I told her so. She looked toward the dining room where Derek was on the phone. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. He says, once we stabilize, in the first year," he said before the opening. "He's doing his best." I looked at my daughter then, really looked at her. She was 34 years old and she had her mother's eyes and her husband's sentences. The opening night party was supposed to be the celebration. What it turned out to be was the first night they knew I understood what had happened. Derek's announcement to the guests, the apron, the joke about retirement, the graceful erasure, was not impulsive. It was prepared. The laugh was too smooth. The pivot to the next table was too fast. I waited until most of the guests had moved to the bar side of the room. Then I found Derek near the host stand and asked him quietly whether my name would appear on the operating documents. "Frank, this isn't the night for this. What night would you suggest?" He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a white envelope. "There are some vendor release forms I need you to sign tonight. Standard stuff. Supplier accounts you established before we incorporated. While you're at it, there's one more page in there. Read it when you get upstairs." I took the envelope. I went upstairs to the apartment above the restaurant where I had been staying since the build-out began, where Derek had assured me I could remain for as long as I liked. The vendor releases were legitimate. 4 of them, routine. The 5th page was something else. It referenced a purchase option under the Caldwell Street lease. It did not name a price. It did not include a purchase agreement. It contained a signature line for me and a blank space marked for a notary stamp. I read it 3 times. Then I set it aside from the other 4. I signed nothing. I folded the 5th page into my copy of the original lease, which I kept in a fireproof lockbox bolted to the floor of the storage closet off the upstairs hallway. I took the 4 legitimate vendor releases back downstairs so Caroline could return them to the suppliers. Then I went back upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed Dottie and I had shared before she got sick, and counted what was in my wallet. $487. I wrote the number on the back of a grocery receipt because I wanted to remember exactly what I was worth, according to this night. Before I packed my bag, I took 2 things from the lockbox. The recipe box that had belonged to my mother, 40-some index cards in her handwriting. The red ink she always used, covering everything from her cornbread to her Christmas fruitcake. And my copy of the lease with the 5th page folded inside it. I put the lockbox key on my key ring and put the ring in my coat pocket. Downstairs, Caroline found me near the back exit. "Dad," her voice was careful, "I'm going to find somewhere to stay tonight. You live here. Derek told me tonight that I don't." She looked back toward the dining room. I could hear Derek laughing at something. The sound carried all the way to the kitchen. "He doesn't mean it the way it sounded," she said. I kissed her forehead, "Then have him call me tomorrow and say so." He didn't call. I drove to a Super 8 off the interstate and sat in the parking lot for a while before going in. I was 61 years old. My truck had 140,000 miles on it. My blood pressure medication was in my coat pocket. I had a recipe box, a lease document, a key that no longer opened any door that wanted me, and $487. I want to tell you about Dottie before I go further, because none of what I chose next makes sense without her. Dottie grew up in a house in East Knoxville where her mother canned vegetables every August because the pantry was the only insurance they had. Dottie believed that feeding people was one of the few things a person could do that was always, without exception, worth doing. She didn't care much about ownership or credit. She cared about the table being full and the food being honest. When I told her my biscuit recipe was better than her mother's, she said, that wasn't the point. The point was that both of us knew how to make them. She taught Caroline to cook when Caroline was 4 years old, standing on a step stool at the counter. She made me promise, near the end, that I would not let the kitchen on Caldwell Street become something decorative. She said the worst thing that could happen to a good building was for it to stop being used by people who needed it. I kept that promise. Eventually. First, I had to survive not being the person she believed I was. The motel cost $59 a night. I stayed for 3 nights before my old friend Raymond Busby called. Raymond had been my supervisor at the county roads department in the 1990s before I left to run the catering business full-time. He'd retired to a farm property outside of Maryville, about 20 miles south of Knoxville, and he was the kind of man who sent birthday cards with handwritten notes and meant every word. I hadn't told anyone what happened. He called because he heard it from his wife's sister, who had been at the opening night party. "Frank," he said, "where are you sleeping?" I told him, "Pack your bag." He had a guest cabin behind the main house, a single room with a wood stove and a porch that faced east. He didn't ask me to explain anything the first night. We sat on that porch in the October cold and drank coffee and watched the dark until it started to lighten. In the morning, he drove me to the county extension office, where his neighbor ran a commercial food prep certification program out of a teaching kitchen. They needed someone to lead a Saturday baking module. The pay was $22 an hour, 2 Saturdays a month. It was the first money I had earned since Holt Family Kitchen opened. I held that first check longer than was necessary, not because of the amount, because nobody had handed it to me out of family feeling or obligation. I had taught 12 people how to make a proper pie crust, and they had paid the agreed price. The simplicity felt like something I hadn't known I'd been missing. Within 2 months, I was teaching 4 days a week at the extension kitchen and consulting on weekends for a church-run meal program in Maryville that needed help scaling their recipes for 200 guests instead of 20. A retired home economics teacher named Beverly Marsh ran the program. She was organized in the way that people who have fed large groups for decades are organized methodically, without drama, always thinking 3 steps ahead. "You're wasted on pie crusts," she told me one afternoon while we portioned soup. "The pie crusts pay the bills." I said, "Barely, I'd imagine." She wasn't wrong. What Beverly had was a vision that outpaced her resources. The church meal program had a waiting list. Local food pantries were referring people they couldn't serve. A county commissioner had mentioned community kitchen space in a meeting, but no one had a building. Beverly had a federal grant application half-written and no anchor facility to put in it. I thought about the building on Caldwell Street, not with anger, but with the specific pain of watching something you built be used for a purpose smaller than what it was built for. I rented a room from Raymond's neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Mr. Aldridge, for $300 a month. My Social Security covered that and my medication. The teaching income covered food and gas, and the occasional book from the used shop in Maryville. I was not comfortable. I was not desperate. What I was, slowly, was myself again. I sent Lily a card every birthday. The first one came back unopened. The second came back with "Return to Sender" written on it in Derek's handwriting. I knew the printing because he'd written it the same way on every invoice during the build-out. The third card came back with the envelope torn at one corner, as though someone had opened it and then changed their mind about returning it. I called Caroline. Derek answered. I asked for my daughter. He said she was busy with the restaurant and would call when she had time. She called once, 3 weeks later, at 11 in the morning when she knew I'd be teaching. She left a voicemail asking me not to contact Lily directly. She said Lily was confused and the situation was upsetting for everyone. She said, when things settled down, we could talk about supervised visits. I saved that voicemail to an old digital recorder I kept in my glove compartment. Paul Griffith told me that Tennessee grandparents did not have an automatic right to visitation when a parent objected. A court could sometimes intervene, but litigation was slow and expensive and placed Lily in the middle of adult conflict. Keep a record, he said. Keep writing. Don't give them anything they can characterize as threatening. So I wrote. I sent cards and short letters, never about the restaurant, never about Derek, never about what had been done. I wrote about the farm, about Raymond's chickens, about a recipe I was working on for sweet potato rolls. I drew small pictures of kitchen tools for Lily because she used to ask me what everything was called. Each piece of returned mail went into a plastic bin under my bed. On her 8th birthday, I sent a recipe card in my mother's red ink, written out in my own hand, her great-grandmother's tea cake recipe, the one Lily had helped me make the last Christmas before the opening. It came back a week later, unopened. The handwriting on the return address looked like Lily's, careful and uneven, the way a child writes when someone is watching to make sure they get it right. That envelope sat on my workbench for a long time. Raymond found me staring at it one evening. He was quiet for a moment, And then he said something I wrote down afterward. He said, "A locked door stays locked until the person inside decides to open it, or until the person inside becomes someone else entirely. Either way, you can't push it open from out here." I asked him what I was supposed to do. He said, "Build something worth coming home to." Beverly's grant application was accepted the following spring. The county committed a small match. A local foundation contributed equipment funds. What Beverly didn't have was a facility. What she proposed to me was a community food hub, a licensed commercial kitchen that small food businesses, caterers, church programs, and cooking educators could rent by the hour. The model was self-sustaining if utilization stayed above 60%. Beverly had done the math. She had the users lined up. What she needed was a location. I drove to Caldwell Street twice before I told her about the building. I sat across the street in my truck each time and looked at the lit-up sign that read Holt Family Kitchen in the font Caroline and I had designed together. The dining room looked full. The copper pots were visible through the kitchen window, hanging in exactly the places I had put them. I drove home both times without stopping. On the third drive, I didn't get out of the truck, but I allowed myself to think clearly about what I owned and what I did not. The building was mine. The business inside it was leased until the following November. The food, the reputation, the recipes, those were more complicated. The recipes I had shared freely were mine by origin but impossible to claw back. What I had, still, was the one thing that had never been signed away: the deed to the building and the terms of the lease that governed everything inside it. That night I called Paul Griffith and told him Beverly's proposal. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Frank, the lease expires in 11 months. If Holt Family Kitchen wants to stay, they need a new lease or a purchase agreement. Either way, you're back at the table." 11 months later, on a Thursday morning while I was teaching a sauce reduction class, Paul called my cell. "Did you sign a purchase option exercise any time in the last decade?" he asked. "No. Were you ever in front of a notary named Glenn Prater?" "Never heard of him." "Someone has presented a title company with a document that says otherwise." He emailed me the scan. It was a one-page memorandum, dated about 18 months after the restaurant opened, bearing what appeared to be my signature and a notary stamp. It referenced the Caldwell Street purchase option. Below the typed paragraphs was a signature that looked like mine, same slant, same break between the F and the R in Frank. I knew immediately. The top half of the page was the fifth document from Derek's opening night envelope, the one I had never signed. The signature below it matched one I had placed on a supplier delivery receipt during the kitchen build-out. I had a carbon copy of that receipt in the lockbox. The notary stamp bore a commission date that I wrote down and gave to Paul to verify. He called back within an hour. Glenn Prater's notary commission had been issued 14 months after the date printed on the memorandum, Paul said. That document could not have been notarized on that date by that person. I sat down on the porch step. The reason for the forgery became clear quickly. A hospitality group out of Nashville called Cornerstone Concepts had approached Derek about acquiring Holt Family Kitchen as a flagship location for a regional expansion. The reported deal valued the property and the business together at $1.9 million. Cornerstone's attorneys had ordered a title search before releasing a deposit. The title examiner found my deed, the recorded commercial lease, and no valid transfer. Derek had told Cornerstone that a purchase option had been exercised years ago and that a routine deed from me was the only remaining step. Paul filed an affidavit of facts affecting title and sent written notice to Holt Family Kitchen, Cornerstone Concepts, and the title insurer. That same afternoon, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "We should discuss a resolution. Derek." I did not respond. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing scholarship applications for a summer cooking program Beverly had organized through the Extension office. Applications were submitted with identifying information removed, reviewed on merit only Beverly's rule, which I had adopted when I helped build our selection criteria. One application described 4 years of after-school work in a family restaurant, 1 year of community college food service coursework, and a goal to design meals for elderly residents who had difficulty swallowing. The applicant wrote, "My great-grandmother's recipes taught me that the point of cooking isn't impressing people. The point is making sure someone has what they need." I marked the file for an interview. When Beverly removed the cover sheet after scoring, the name at the top was Lily Ann Holt. I want you to understand what that moment felt like. On the same afternoon, I had confirmed that Derek Holt had forged my signature to steal my building. My granddaughter's application had landed on my desk. She was 18 years old. Beverly suggested I recuse myself from her interview. I told her I would observe but not score. I also asked Beverly not to tell Lily we were related before she entered the room. She arrived 7 minutes early. She wore a navy blazer over a white shirt and carried a canvas tote bag with a reusable coffee cup sticking out of the top. When she walked into the conference room and saw me, she stopped in the doorway. "I know you," she said. "We haven't seen each other in a while," I said. "Please come in." She looked at the chair across from me for a long moment. Then she sat down. "My mom said you left," she told me. "I was asked to leave the building. I didn't leave you." Beverly moved the conversation to the application, explaining that I would not be scoring her responses. Lily kept her eyes on me a moment longer, then shifted her attention to Beverly and answered the program questions with a directness that surprised me. She knew her gaps. She said so plainly. When Beverly placed a broken rice cooker on the table and asked how she'd adapt a recipe for a resident who could only eat soft foods and couldn't lift anything heavier than a coffee mug, Lily asked 3 clarifying questions before she answered. She didn't propose the most elegant solution. She proposed the most practical one. The panel scored her 3rd out of 9. She advanced. She waited near the parking lot when the others had gone. "Did you ever try to contact me?" she asked. "Every birthday and most Christmases." The cards came back. Something moved across her face. "Not quite belief. Not quite doubt. My dad said you tried to take the restaurant from them. Your dad used a document with my name on it to tell a company in Nashville that he owned a building I own. A notary who couldn't have been present signed off on it." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to take my word for it," I said. "I have postal receipts for every card I sent. I have the original unsigned version of the document your father showed that company. I have the notary's commission date. If you want to see all of it, I'll show you." "Why didn't you fight for me sooner?" she asked. The question landed exactly where it was meant to. I was advised that a court fight would put you between 2 groups of adults you depended on. I didn't think I had the right to make your life into a legal case. Maybe I was wrong. I've thought about it a lot. She studied me the way Dottie used to study a recipe she wasn't sure about, looking for what she might have missed the first time. "My mom talks about you sometimes," she said. "Not often." "What does she say?" "That you made the best biscuits she ever tasted." I didn't say anything, and that she should have told you that more. The next morning, Paul Griffith and I sent formal inspection notice to Holt Family Kitchen. The lease expired in 46 days. Unless a valid purchase agreement existed, the company was required to surrender the property in the conditions specified by the lease. Derek's attorney responded within 2 hours, demanding all communication go through counsel and accusing me of interfering with a pending transaction. When Paul and I arrived at the building 3 days later, Derek was waiting with 2 attorneys and a property manager. Caroline stood near the pass-through window to the kitchen. She did not look at me directly. The building looked polished and expensive. The copper pots gleamed. The chalkboard menu had been redesigned in a different font. The handwritten quality was gone. It looked like something from a design magazine trying to look handmade. I inspected the kitchen and mechanical systems, while Paul documented conditions. In the storage closet off the hallway, I knelt on the floor and felt beneath the lower shelf. The lockbox was still bolted to the floor. "What is that?" Derek asked from the doorway. I held up my key ring. "Something I stored here." Inside, the original unsigned 5th page, my copy of the lease, Dottie's recipe log from the catering years, and the carbon copy of the delivery receipt bearing my signature. Paul put on gloves. He lifted the unsigned page and held it beside the scan of the forged memorandum on his tablet screen. The paragraphs matched, including a line break in the second paragraph that appeared in both documents, the kind of formatting artifact that carries over when a page is reproduced rather than retyped. Caroline sat down on a step stool in the corner. It was the step stool I had built for her when she was 7, small enough to fit under the counter, so she could reach the surface where her mother was teaching her to roll dough. Derek's attorney said the original document could have been a draft. Paul said, "Then produce the signed original. It was lost during an office move. Produce the notary's contemporaneous records." Derek looked at his attorney. The attorney said they would need time to compile responsive documents. As Paul and I left through the back, Caroline followed me to the parking lot. We stood beside my truck in the November cold. "Did he show you the memorandum before he used it?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "He said you had signed it when he was traveling, that a notary came to you. Did you believe him?" She looked at the building, at the sign with her family name on it, at the door I had hung, the threshold I had tiled, the window I had reframed. "I wanted to," she said. "That's not what I asked." She closed her eyes. "No, I didn't believe him." The words hung between us in the cold air. "Lily applied to the summer program," I said. "She made it on merit." Caroline's expression shifted. "I didn't recruit her. Her name was covered when we reviewed the files. When she came for her interview and saw me, she stayed anyway. She didn't tell me. She's 18. She gets to decide what she tells you." That night, I received a call from a number I recognized as Derek's cell. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. He said there was enough money in the Cornerstone deal for everyone. He said I should name a number. He said good lawyers cost more than good sense. I forwarded the message to Paul and went to bed. Derek's company filed suit before we did, asking the Knox County Circuit Court to enforce the alleged purchase option, declare Holt Family Kitchen the equitable owner of the Caldwell Street property, and block any interference with the Cornerstone acquisition. The complaint described me as an estranged family member attempting to exploit a technical defect in a document that reflected the clear intent of all parties. It was a well-written complaint. Parts of it were even true. I had been absent from the building for nearly a decade. They had maintained it. The neighborhood was worth more now than it had been. A persuasive lie almost always has a true foundation. We answered with the recorded deed, the commercial lease, the unsigned original, and the notary's commission records. Paul filed a quiet title action. He did not include the returned birthday cards, the saved voicemails, or the Christmas letters. "A court deciding title needs title evidence," he told me. "A judge can't weigh your grief." I had spent years wanting someone in authority to hear the whole story. What I learned, slowly, was that the whole story and the provable facts are sometimes the same size, and sometimes they are not. During discovery, a forensic document examiner compared the signature on Derek's memorandum with a range of known samples from my records. The match to the delivery receipt was exact, not similar. Exact, including a small ink variation in the tail of my last name that I had always made when signing quickly, a habit that would not repeat identically if the signature were made twice by hand. The notary problem destroyed what was left of Derek's position. Glenn Prater, in his deposition, said he had never met me, had never witnessed any signature on a Caldwell Street document, and that the stamp image on the memorandum didn't match the physical stamp he received when his commission was issued. He remembered Derek asking him, several years earlier, for a digital image of a notary seal for use in a website design project. He had provided it without thinking. Derek still argued that the totality of our family relationship proved an oral gift. Paul asked for any written evidence of an agreed price, a deposit, a board resolution, or a tax filing that characterized the building as an asset of the company. None existed. For 10 years, Holt Family Kitchen had listed the Caldwell Street lease as an operating obligation on every tax return and had deducted rent $1 as a business expense. The company had called itself a tenant in every document it filed, until the moment a buyer appeared. Caroline requested a meeting with me through Paul, without Derek's attorneys present. We met at Paul's conference table with a mediator present at her request. She came alone. She said she had known, within the first year of the restaurant's operation, that my ownership share was not going to be formalized. She said Derek had told her my contribution had been reclassified as a gift because formalizing it would complicate the company's financing. She said she had told herself that she would find a way to make it right once the business was stable. She said stable never came because Derek kept refinancing and expanding, and the next deal was always almost done. "I taught you to cook," I said. "I taught you how to read a contract. I taught you that a handshake is a promise, and a promise is a document waiting to happen. I know. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I know who taught you better." She looked at the table. "I should have protected you. Yes, I don't know what to do with that. That's not something I can tell you. But it might start with what you're willing to say under oath." 2 weeks later, Paul received an amended discovery response from Caroline's separate attorney. Attached was a sworn declaration in which my daughter stated that, to her knowledge, I had never signed any purchase option exercise, that the $58,000 I contributed had been characterized as a non-repayable gift without my agreement or knowledge, and that she had repeated Derek's claim about the memorandum despite having no personal evidence it was valid. It was the first honest document that had come out of that building in 11 years. Derek took the stand and contradicted himself twice. His attorney asked for a recess. The forensic examiner's testimony was specific and unambiguous. Judge Patricia Waverly asked Derek's lead attorney 3 times to produce the original signed document. 3 times the attorney said it had been lost. Then explain how the notary's stamp appears on a date 14 months before the notary was commissioned, the judge said. The attorney said he was not in a position to explain that. The judge issued her ruling 8 days later. No enforceable purchase agreement existed. No valid exercise of the option had occurred. No payment had been made and no deposit had been deposited. The company's decade of maintenance and improvement had been made under a commercial lease that explicitly required it. Title was quieted in my name. The memorandum was declared void and ordered removed from the public record. One sentence from her ruling stayed with me. She wrote, "An implied familial intent to transfer property, however genuinely believed by one party, does not constitute a conveyance recognized under Tennessee law." Outside the courthouse, Lily was waiting on the steps. She had sat in the back of the gallery during the ruling. She held the door of the stairwell for Caroline when we came out, and she looked at her mother for a long moment before she looked at me. "I found one of the cards," she said. "The tea cake recipe. I thought that one came back. Mom kept 3. She paused. She said she was saving them. I think she was saving something. I'm not sure it was the cards. I didn't answer that. "I've been thinking about Great-Grandma's recipe box," she said. "The one you have. It's in my truck." She almost smiled. "Of course it is." Cornerstone Concepts terminated its agreement with Holt Family Kitchen 2 weeks after the ruling. Without the property, the acquisition had no anchor. Derek's refinanced loans became callable. Holt Family Kitchen entered bankruptcy proceedings 6 months later. The trustee allowed the business 60 additional days to remove inventory and close accounts. 11 former employees filed wage claims. Several of them found their way to Beverly's program for transitional support. I met with Beverly, Paul, Raymond, and 2 representatives from the county extension office to discuss the building. "I want to be honest with you about this part. I thought about selling. The building was worth nearly $1 million by that point, and I was 69 years old. And $1 million can buy a great deal of comfort and security. I drove past the building at night twice, trying to decide, and both times I thought about Dottie standing in the empty space in 2009 saying the bones were good. A building that was only good for selling had already become what she warned against. We established the Dottie Carver Community Kitchen Trust. I contributed the property subject to a long-term lease requiring it to be used for food education, community meal programs, and small food business incubation for a minimum of 30 years. A community development lender financed the renovation against signed program agreements from the Extension Office and 4 community organizations. The county contributed a workforce grant. Beverly became the executive director. The day the rehab crew opened the walls for electrical upgrades, they found an old shelf Dottie had installed in 1994, the year we bought the building, with a jar of her bread and butter pickles still sealed on it. The construction foreman brought it to me like it was something fragile. I put it on my kitchen counter and looked at it for a week before I opened it. Lily completed the summer program with a final project she called Soft Table, a meal service model designed for care facility residents with dysphagia, the eating difficulty that affects millions of older adults. She had tested every recipe on residents at a local facility, adjusted textures, consulted with a speech therapist, and presented her results with the kind of specificity that makes a panel stop scribbling and just listen. Beverly offered her a paid position as a program associate. Lily called me before she accepted. "Is it weird if I work there?" she asked. "Is it weird that I'll be in the building regularly?" "That's not what I'm asking. The program is worth doing," I said. "Whether you take the job depends on whether you want to do it." "I want to." "Then that's your answer." She paused. "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" It was the first time she had said the word. She said it the way people say something they've been practicing carefully, and then all at once. "Yes," I said. "Did you ever think about giving up? On finding a way back to me?" I thought about Raymond's porch, about the first check from the extension office, About 50-some returned envelopes in a plastic bin. I thought about it once, I said. Then I thought about what your grandmother would say to me if I did, and I thought about it less after that. She laughed. Just briefly. It sounded like Caroline at 7, the laugh Dottie used to say could fill a room. The Dottie Carver Community Kitchen opened on a Saturday in late March. More than 200 people came through the door. Former catering clients, extension office students, church meal program volunteers, neighbors from the blocks around Caldwell Street who remembered the building from its warehouse days. Caroline came. She sat near the back and did not ask for acknowledgement. Lily had told her about the opening, and she had come without being invited and without expecting anything. When I passed her table, she pressed her hand briefly against my arm and then looked away. I kept walking. That was where we were. It was more than where we had been. Raymond sat in the front row next to Beverly and ate 2 servings of the sweet potato rolls I'd spent 11 years perfecting. He declared them almost as good as his wife's. I told him his wife would be pleased to hear it, and he said probably not, because she'd been trying to get that recipe out of me since 1997. After the program, I found Lily in the kitchen, wiping down the prep tables. She had her great-grandmother's recipe box open on the counter beside her. I've been trying to figure out the custard amounts on the tea cake card, she said. Great-grandma's handwriting is approximate, I said. She never measured anything exactly. She said the recipe was in the hands, not the card. How do I learn what's in the hands? Same way your mother did. Same way I did. I stood beside her at the counter. You make it until you stop looking at the card. She nodded, put the card back in the box, and started from memory. The first batch needed more nutmeg. The second batch was close. The third one she slid onto the cooling rack and looked at with the expression of someone who has just understood a thing they thought they already knew. I thought about the night I walked out of this same kitchen with $487 in my pocket, believing that number measured what I was worth. I thought about how long it had taken me to understand that the measurement was wrong, not because the number was too small, but because I had agreed to be measured that way. I did not become whole again because a judge returned my building. The deed had always been mine, what I had given away without realizing it, and then for too long after I did, was the habit of insisting that what I built had my name on it. Not out of pride, out of accuracy. A man who makes something and then erases himself from it is not being humble. He is teaching the people around him what he believes he deserves. I learned that at 61 years old, with $487 to my name and a recipe box on the passenger seat of my truck. I am still learning it. Lily packaged the third batch of tea cakes in a small box and set it on the windowsill above the sink. For you, she said. I know the recipe. I know. She looked at me. They're because you came back. I wanted to tell her I had never left. But that was only partly true, and she deserved the fully true version. So instead I said, so did you. She picked up a cooling rack and carried it to the drying shelf, and I stood in the kitchen that Dottie had said was worth saving. In the building, I had nearly let become something that no longer needed me, and I thought not for the first time, but with more certainty than I had managed in a long while, that repair is not the same as return. Return means going back to what was. Repair means making something that can hold weight again. The tea cakes cooled on the windowsill. Outside, the late March light came through the tall factory windows the way it had always come, low and long, and without apology. I put on my apron. We had work to do.